Good afternoon. Welcome to the Campus Compact webinar on campus structures and functions for equitable engagement. We're excited that you have joined us today to hear from some amazing panelists on the ways that they are integrating diversity, equity, inclusion, and community and civic engagement functions on their campus for the purpose of engaging in equitable engagement. I am Castel Sweet. I serve as the 2022-2023 Strategy and Vision Fellow for Campus Compact this academic year. And that's something that I have been exploring specifically during my time as a fellow. So looking at the different structures, different models, different ways that campuses are trying to work towards equitable engagement, but how they're particularly doing that through the way that they're structured and through the way that they go about functioning as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and community engagement efforts. So we have some great panelists here today that will share some examples of what their campus structures look like and how they're pursuing equitable engagement. And I can't wait for you to hear about the amazing work that they're doing. But before we jump into that, just wanted to give you a little bit of background of some of the other things that I have found so far in my work with Campus Compact, of looking at these various campuses. So I'm not going to take too much time because I know we want to get to hear from the amazing panelists today, but just want to give a little bit of background of what I have seen so far in this work. So I wanted to share that over the fall semester, I have been looking at different campuses. And so in that research, I have found about 25 campuses that do have integrated structures at their institution. So I wanted to document them because oftentimes when we think about doing things, particularly change, anything new in higher education, it's often a slow process, and it's often a daunting process to change the way we've been doing things for a number of years. Change is not typically taken easily or lightly in higher education, but looking at some other ways that institutions are thinking about moving in the direction of equitably engagement, that can help us provide some inspiration and some examples of how we can approach that given the context of the institution that we may be in. So looking at those 25 campuses, one of the things I did notice that there are a number of campuses that have an integrated division or office that includes distinctive community engagement centers or offices and diversity, equity, inclusion related offices. That is the case for us here at the University of Mississippi. I am the director of the Center for Community Engagement, but we are housed within the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement. We do have a sister center, the Center for Inclusion and Cross-Cultural Engagement, which is largely our multicultural office. But again, we're both housed within the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement. And within that core division, most of our institutional-wide diversity, equity, inclusion work comes out of our shared division that houses those two distinct centers. So I saw that at a number of other campuses, and you may even think of some other examples on this call with us today that we'll hear from later that have that shared umbrella, but happen to be co-housed or co-located by, a shared office or a shared division. So another group of campuses that I saw was an integrated structure that largely was diversity, equity, inclusion focused, but they maybe had one or two community or civic engagement roles that were housed within that largely diversity focused office. So I saw the ways with those particular positions, which they approach their work of civic engagement using that foundational lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think that's interesting to have that approach. And I think that's important for us to consider the way that people are housed and where they're placed can largely influence the way that they engage and go about doing their work. And again, where we're housed is so important, even as we think about how institutions are so siloed and you have these distinctive buckets or these distinctive boxes, but also where you land on the hierarchy of a university. So who you report up through, makes a big difference in resources and kind of the collaborations, things you have access to, people you have access to, and kind of greatly influence the work that you're able to do and the things that you're able to accomplish, just largely by where you sit and in the university. So looking at that, I noticed the ways that some campuses position these integrated structures or these integrated roles at different places along that hierarchy structure. So there were some campuses that reported up through a vice chancellor or a vice president, some that went up on the academic side, and there are also some that went up through the student affairs side. There's some that also went up through an outreach arm. And so looking at the way that they're structured at university also gave me some idea of kind of their approach to the functions of how and through what lens they integrated diversity, equity, inclusion work with their civic and community engagement work. Another thing that I saw with a number of institutions that I was very surprised to see and I didn't expect are the number of integrated structures that were embedded within a particular school or college at an institution. I saw this with a number of professional schools, particularly medical schools, that had their own role that was integrated. So it could have been a dean or an assistant dean of diversity and community engagement, or there could have been a director within a school or college that was focused on diversity and community engagement for that respective unit or school. And so I thought that that was interesting. It's something that I did not expect to see, for that integration to be so particular to a school or college or a particular field. But once I kind of saw that come up a number of times across campuses, it kind of started to sit in and make sense, particularly for professional schools or professional schools or medical schools, medical professions, of approaching that profession and that practice through a lens of both diversity and community engagement. So looking at the ways as a professional, as a field, that they are approaching their target audience or the clientele that they work with through the lens of diversity, but how they're engaging with those who come in contact with their field in an equitable way. So I thought that was interesting as well to see a number of those campuses that had that embedded structure within a school or college, sometime particularly for the medical campuses that may not have been in the same physical location as their main campus or their larger campus, that on that other larger campus or main campus, there was not an integrated structure. So again, it made me kind of think through or question how university systems, how some campuses or some branches of a larger university system may have an integrated structure, but some parts of that system may not. So we'll also hear today about just at the system level for those university systems, what that could look like, of how to work across campuses. Again, for us in higher education, that's typically siloed, but how do you work across a larger university system to work towards some equitable engagement? Kind of the last thing I'll share with you today before we jump in our conversation is I noticed that there was one campus in particular that had a distinctive diversity, equity, and inclusion office, that also had a distinctive community and civic engagement office. But in addition to those two, it housed a Truth and Racial Healing and Transformation Campus Center in partnership with the Kellogg Foundation and AACNU, so the American Association of Colleges and Universities. So I thought that that was interesting, one particular interesting approach of how to integrate these functions, one example of how to do that, because again, every campus is different. We have rural, urban, public, private, 4-year, 2-year. So every campus looks largely different, and it's in a largely different community with those that we engage with. So understanding all the different ways that we could potentially pursue equitable engagement depending on the context that we're in, and to identify that particular model of also hosting a Truth and Racial Healing and Transformation Center that integrates both diversity, equity, inclusion, and community engagement functions was just one of the models that showed up of how a campus was pursuing equitable engagement.
Welcome to all of our guests, and thank you for welcoming me to this session, Dr. Sweet. I really appreciate it, and always appreciate a chance to talk about what we're doing in Texas. There's so much going on in Texas right now. If you're watching the news, you know. But I'll speak primarily to where I am located and situated at the University of Texas at Austin. So the University of Texas at Austin is our public flagship university. It is one of the anchor institutions in our city, I would argue, with our HBCU, Houston-Tillotson University, and our Dell Medical School. We are 50,000 students strong, about 20,000 staff members, and about 3,000 or so faculty members. We have a stated public service mission at our university, and that's where so much of this work is aligned. I really appreciated, Dr. Sweet, your taxonomy just now about the ways that these units could be organized. So I am Assistant VP for Community and Economic Engagement, and I sit in our Division of Diversity and Community Engagement. And I know, Dr. Sweet, that UT and Mississippi have had a long relationship together, so I appreciate that you know what that name means as well. So we also sit in a really large umbrella organization. We report to a campus president, so we are a vice presidential portfolio. But since our founding, we've also expanded so that there are deans of diversity in our 18 colleges, schools, and units across our highly giant decentralized university. So there's a preview of my pros and cons. But what I will say is that our Division of Diversity and Community Engagement emerged from, I would argue, two very important changes in our community. One was an acknowledgement of the deep distrust of our communities of the university. So, we had, we all know probably the Sweat v. Painter case, which happened here, as it relates to integrating higher ed campuses. And so we were a campus that was excluded Black and Brown folks until quite recently in our history. And not only that, but our campus took advantage of the segregation in the city of Austin to use policies like eminent domain to take over areas of Black and Brown Austin. And so there was always a deep level of distrust by the community of our university, not only as it related to the students, the Black and Brown students who eventually enrolled here and their experience of belonging or not belonging on this campus, but also the ways in which our university actually interacted with the communities around us. So there was the distrust. There was also the Hopwood case in Texas, which is popularly known as the top 10% law, which essentially said that we're not allowed to use race in our admissions process. So both of those together gave an opportunity for a really visionary president, and I think this is probably part of that taxonomy too, a really visionary president, Bill Powers, to come out and create a division of diversity and community engagement. So how we're structured is very intentionally to address both of those issues of diversity and community engagement. And so what he did was created a vice presidential portfolio with a vice presidential budget, pulling from academic affairs, student affairs, external affairs in some cases, and putting these units together, about 50 units strong, about 400 employees at our height, into one division. And so these units span 4 pillars, I would say. One is community engagement, one is an inclusive campus. So the ways in which we promote belonging among the students who are here. promotes student success programs, so tutoring, advising, intensive mentoring programs on the campus itself for students, primarily first-gen students and students from underserved high schools, under-resourced high schools. And the final area is K through 12 outreach. So in creating this really robust kind of what we call sort of cradle to career, or I've heard cradle to grave, which it's a lot, but cradle to career, that spectrum. What we're doing is our public service mission and really reaching out to students when they're young, students when they get here. We're providing students transformative experiences in the community, which in itself, as we all know, as community engagement professionals, creates opportunities for our students to step off the campus and have conversations, interactions with people who are not them. And then, of course, the campus climate, making sure that our students feel at home here. Very famously, that came into play. I know Richmond knows this, but like it came into play during 2015 when we took down Confederate statues on our campus. Very briefly, my community engagement portfolio then is also robust with student-facing programs, faculty-facing programs, community-facing programs, and a grantsmanship library. So I'll leave that there. It's a intentionally created division with an intentional strategic plan, the goal of which is to ensure that diversity efforts and community engagement efforts are intersecting. Thank you.
And I forgot to remind folks, as we're hearing about the different examples, please feel free to drop questions in the chat, because we do want this to be a space where we can answer questions that folks may have, that you may be curious about, that you may just be wondering, or if there's things that you want to also offer up, feel free to use the chat function for that. So Rochelle, do you want to share about what's going on in St. Louis?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me and for you all being here today. And I'm just so thrilled. So I'm Rochelle Smith. I'm the new Vice President for Diversity and Innovative Community Engagement here at St. Louis University. And given our context, I think it's important to let you know how my office was created and sort of its evolution over the last, I would say, 7 to 8 years. So St. Louis University is a private Jesuit institution. It's actually the second oldest Jesuit institution in the country. And it was founded in 1818, and it has a mission, which is a pursuit of truth to the greater glory of God. This is my very first Jesuit institution. I've worked at private institutions before, but never a Jesuit. So I'm pretty new, not to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've been doing that almost 25 years, but never had been at a Jesuit institution. So St. Louis University, affectionately known as SLU, has 2 campuses, one in St. Louis, Missouri, and one in Madrid, Spain. So we are pretty much based, my office is based in St. Louis, and some of the evolving work of the office is to be more present in Madrid. So the origin of our office is a pretty unique one. It's rooted in a 2014 event called Occupy SLU. And it happened in 2014 when a group of protesters came onto our campus for a week. after the killing of Michael Brown in August 8th of 2014, and then Von Derek Myers in St. Louis, Missouri. Mr. Brown was in Ferguson, Missouri, which is about 20 minutes outside of St. Louis. And so for a week in the fall of 2014, a great number of protesters came onto our campus, and they congregated at a place that we call the Clock Tower. And as you can imagine, it's sort of a rotunda with a clock in the middle of it, and they would not leave. The president engaged with them, and faculty engaged with them, and ultimately there were 13 accords that were agreed upon by the president and the protesters. And Dr. Jonathan Smith, who was a faculty member at the time at SLU in American Studies and African American Studies, was one of the primary architects of the accords and building the relationship with the protesters to get them comfortable enough to leave the work to the campus and actually take up their camp and leave the university. And so basically, one of those 13 accords was the development of an office and a primary person working with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at first, the position was a special assistant to the president. And Dr. Jonathan Smith applied for and obtained the role as a special assistant. And then ultimately, he became the inaugural vice president for diversity and innovative community engagement. Unfortunately, in 2021, Dr. Smith passed away suddenly from stroke. And he's very missed at the institution and missed by me. Uniquely, he was my husband. And, it was just a very unique situation that I also have been in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the institution needed a leader. So I accepted the role. That's another story for another day to share with you how unique that is on campus. And so around 2021, right before Dr. Smith passed away, there was a merger of the Office of the Center for Social Action and the Center for Global Citizenship. Now, both of these units had been primarily student-facing, and one of them had been under student development, which was the Center for Social Action. And so it was decided by the provost and Dr. Smith that it would be better for these units to come under the diversity, equity, and inclusion unit to have more power and impact at SLU. And that happened in 2021. And so the diversity office went from 2 individuals to now 15 individuals. And so the benefits of that is, for example, when we had the horrible killing of Mr. Nichols a couple of months ago, not only were we able to send out, like every other institution, the thoughts and prayers letter to the institution about what had happened, but because we have a social action office rooted and grounded in our diversity office, we were able to actually do something. We have rallies, we have call-in campaigns to senators and representatives. And in fact, for our Martin Luther King event that we had this year, we had Miss Sabrina Fulton, who is the mother of Trayvon Martin, who was killed in Florida in, I believe, may have been before 2014. And she has inspired us to even make it, to bring these conversations to bear in a larger way, even academically. And we had already started doing that in developing information about the impact of violence on Black and Brown individuals. It is now a part of our core, our academic core. So all students have to be exposed to that and the fact that SLU owned slaves. So I'll leave it there, but I'm just very excited that we have this work under my unit, and I'm looking forward to the rich conversations that we'll continue to have. And I think you wanted us to popcorn it to somebody else. So I will send it to Dr. Amy Howard.
Thanks very much. It's such an honor to be on the call and to be learning with all these amazing humans. And Rochelle, I met Jonathan in 2006 and had a meal with him in St. Louis, and he was a remarkable human whose career and life I followed from afar. And it's just a real joy to see you carry on his legacy. SLU's very lucky to have you.
Thank you.
So I'm Amy Howard, and I am the Senior Administrative Officer at the University of Richmond, which is in Richmond, Virginia. We're a private liberal arts plus, we can go into what that means some other time, university. We have about 3,200 undergraduates, and we also have a law school and a school for professional and continuing studies. So the journey to this job, Senior Administrative Officer for the Equity and Community Unit, that is neither a title nor a unit name that is common in higher education. Try the Google search. They are very uncommon, and I kind of want to unpack what they are and what they mean and why we went in this direction. So in 2021, the University of Richmond was in maybe the third year of a new strategic plan that really built on the previous strategic plan. So a new president came in 2019, we put together a strategic plan, and coming off of that was a lot of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. What also came out of that plan, and again, it built on the previous one that the previous president had, which was really nice to see this ladder and stacking of ideas, is the institution actually codified values. One of those values is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Another is access and affordability. And another is ethical engagement in the communities in which we are a part. And so in thinking about those as institutional values, the university got really serious about thinking about how we operationalize those values and how we make them real and salient in all the things that we do. And so in 2021, this new unit called Equity and Community, it's the second smallest unit, we're not the smallest, was created standing alongside the more traditional units of student affairs, enrollment management, advancement, etc. My role sits on the president's cabinet of senior leaders. There are 14 of us at the University of Richmond. And my role reports to the only two executive vice presidents that we have, which is the provost executive vice president and the chief operating officer and executive vice president. And the thinking behind that is across academic affairs, which is where our civic engagement infrastructure had been housed for 19 years, but also across business affairs, community engagement lives across all of that. What are we procuring? What are we buying? Who are we hiring? How are we treating our staff employees? How are we putting community-based learning into our curriculum? So it spans across all the functions of the institution, as does diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? They span across both. So that was the thinking in having this role with a dual report to the two executive vice presidents. So what is this unit? The Equity and Community Unit is really about trying to catalyze and strengthen civic learning and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to advance the university's mission, its vision, and its values. What does that really mean? Maybe too long for a t-shirt. The framework is we're really trying to build skills, knowledge, habits, and disposition of people to advance a thriving democracy. We don't think that community engagement can work without being equity-minded. We don't think equity and justice can happen off campus or on campus without the practices of engaging thoughtfully in civic life. So what is the connection that we can build and strengthen between these two? The unit brings together the nationally recognized Bonner Center for Civic Engagement, which started in 2004, and huge shout out to our friends from the Bonner Foundation on this call. We are very grateful to be in that network. That center is very robust, and for the size of our campus, very large. We're very fortunate to have a faculty engagement team, a student engagement team that also helps support a very large Bonner Scholars Program, and a community engagement team, all working together, both in the academic realm and also the student affairs realm, to advance our public purpose as an institution. So that's a really well-established center with great infrastructure, great credibility on campus. The second part of the unit was a tiny, tiny, tiny new office that we set up called the Office for Institutional Equity and Inclusion. And for those of you who hang out and think about collective impact, as I know I do, the Office for Institutional Equity and Inclusion is a backbone organization on our campus. In 2019, the University of Richmond decided not to hire a chief diversity officer. All that planning around diversity and what we were going to do, we have a lot of work happening. We've been at this for a long time. And after a lot of research, a committee of faculty, staff, and students very clearly said, chief diversity officers burn out, they're under-resourced, and the tenure for them in higher education is 3 years or less. Let's not make it one person's job to institutionalize diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So instead, what we went with is a distributed leadership model where the president and the cabinet is charged and the academic deans are charged with diversity, equity, and inclusion action planning and being responsible for institutional goals. And then there's a wealth of people from student affairs to human resources who are all working on these different pieces as well. And my job is to align and connect and coordinate all of those pieces. And this little Office of Institutional Equity and Inclusion is one piece of that much broader infrastructure that's working to provide resources and consultation to campus to help us align our different actions for more impact. So together we have the Bonner Center for Civic Engagement and this tiny little Office of Institutional Equity and Inclusion. And my role, we are 15 people strong. And some of the advantages have been that all the people who are working together on establishing this new unit, including the two excellent leaders of these different offices, have been working together at the university for now 15 years. We've been there in different roles. We hungrily read the Full Participation Catalyst paper, and I see John Saltmarsh is on this call, that talked years ago about how important it is to link community engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and access and affordability. We've been seeding those conversations on campus for years, and now we're all working together to try to realize and lean into what it can mean to have these two things co-located in the umbrella that Dr. Sweet talked about, but to really think about what it means to be a we. What's the superpower that's more than the sum of the individual parts, and how can we really work toward equitable engagement and community engaged diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work to really, really, really help our campus do what it says it wants to do and its values around ethical engagement and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm happy to talk more in question and answer about the structure, what we're learning. It's new. This is a learning journey, and I've already learned a lot from the wonderful colleagues who are here. But it's exciting work, and I feel really grateful to be in it and in it with all of you. And Deanna, I'm excited to hear what's going on at your college.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Appreciate that. My name is Deanna Villanueva-Saucedo. I'm an Associate Vice Chancellor at Maricopa Community Colleges in the Phoenix area in Arizona. So happy to be with wonderful colleagues today, both on the panel as well as participants. Maricopa is a very large decentralized system. We are a system of 10 independently accredited colleges. I work out of the district office. We serve across our system over 100,000 students annually. 9 of our 10 colleges are Hispanic serving institutions, a very diverse student population. The majority of our students are first-time college goers, first-generation students, and part-time students. We have a lot of working adults who come back to us to re-career, or those students who are just able to afford part-time. So a very diverse, rich population that we serve. In summer of last year, our chancellor, Dr. Stephen Gonzalez, appointed a task force to take a look at what should Maricopa as a system do with work around DEI, work around civic engagement, democracy, as well as shared governance and academic freedom. So this task force, we had faculty, staff, those from our faculty senate, very diverse composition representing a number of different stakeholder groups internally. And their recommendation came back to develop a Center for Excellence in Inclusive Democracy. So that is the center that I currently lead. So the Center for Excellence in Inclusive Democracy, and I'd like to point out that the language was very intentional. Task force members were very insistent that we remain aspirational about the work and that we also create some parity between our portfolios of work as a system in the DEI space, as well as our civic engagement and in essence also shared democracy, taking a look at inclusive practices across the system. So those are the portfolios of work that encompass the center. We at Maricopa had a very strong history in the civic engagement democratic principle space. We had a very robust district office that led system-wide efforts around civic engagement for students, led by very aspirational Associate Vice Chancellor, Dr. Bernie Ronan, very well known in civic engagement circles. Unfortunately, because of budget challenges and leadership challenges, that office had been disbanded. So while we had a very strong history, there wasn't a current district presence. And our colleges have varying levels of staffing. Community colleges across the country, we are grappling with dips in enrollment that have led to budgetary challenges. And so even within our own 10 college system, there's varying levels of staffing support for both DEI functions as well as civic engagement functions. Some colleges that have dedicated staff, others that it's part-time staff, or those on a faculty fellow type position. So really our goal out of the center, it's myself, 2 full-time support staff, currently a vacant position that we will probably repurpose into faculty fellow positions in order to add some bandwidth and capacity. Primary goals at the outset, and this was very intentional again from the task force that created the center. How do we, even as a system, achieve shared meaning around these very core principles at Maricopa? Our work around DEI, what does that mean? What are some of the common goals? How do we bring our system into alignment? What does it mean when we say that we are civically and community engaged? So again, how do we achieve shared meaning? How do we also achieve alignment as a system? With 10 independently accredited colleges, very different portfolios of work and mission, vision, values, how do we come to some consensus and alignment about what the work means for the system? How do we de-siloize the work? I'm appreciative that so many have already mentioned that. In higher ed, we tend to have very siloed functions. And so this new framework is really intended to create an integrated framework around how the system approaches these very distinct portfolios of work. And it will have a combination of student, staff, faculty, and community-facing work. We really want to support the efforts of our 10 independent colleges to engage productively in all of these spaces. And that will include also some parity. While we've had some colleges move in the direction of hiring CDO, diversity officer type position, others not, how do we effectively engage practitioners across our system to think about this integrated framework and robust programming, both community and student facing, and support those efforts adequately? My position is a direct report to the chancellor, so we have great institutional support for the work. Again, just given staffing issues as they are across the country and budgetary challenges, our intention is to grow strong, slow, start small, grow big. So that's our mantra. Welcome any questions as we move along in the discussion. It's just been delightful to hear from all of our colleagues so far.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. It's just great to hear the way that we're all approaching equitable engagement, but in ways that are appropriate for our campuses and our communities and using the resources that we have. So it's always exciting to hear the way that we're all thinking about equitable engagement innovatively and creatively. And I really like, Deanna, that approach to being optimistic on it too, because it can be daunting, it can be challenging, but how do we kind of keep that in mind of where we're trying to go and where we're trying to get to? Thanks, John, for the question in the chat. So I just want to raise that to both Rochelle and Amy. So John's question is about how our campus, well, particularly for the two of you, since your campuses are part of universities studying slavery, how does your campus equity and community engagement efforts connect to reparations work?
I started to write. Oh, go ahead, Rochelle, please go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like you, that's a really good question. We actually had a very robust committee in 2020, right before COVID happened. And then COVID was a priority for the institution. And then my husband passed away, who was the head of the committee, around doing the research, finding the descendants of some of the enslaved at St. Louis University. And now we are picking that back up anew at our institution. So if you know about this work at these institutions nationally, especially within Jesuit institutions, they had been given the work of doing the research, and then the reparations work and grappling with that was given to the national Jesuit bodies. So St. Louis University had done the research, extensive research, and then it was passed on to the Jesuits to do the work that they're going to do. But what we found was that there was still this relationship that we had an opportunity to continue to cultivate with the descendants. And so right now, as I've mentioned, we have put the unfortunate story of the enslaved and their lives within our academic core for all students to read and grapple with themselves. We are meeting with some of the descendants of those who were enslaved at SLU to acknowledge them more, to have them be inculcated more into the fabric of the university. And then beyond that, making recommendations to the provost and the president about the way forward, and including the descendants in any decisions that will be made moving forward. So that's where we are with that work. But thank you for the question.
That's so great to hear. I'll just add a little bit more to what I wrote in the chat. I really appreciate the question. So we're on year 3 of 2 different things. One, through historical research, the institution came to find that our founding leader hired enslaved people and hired out some of those that he enslaved to what was then Richmond College, which became the University of Richmond. So we discovered that and went through a naming process, and we now have naming principles that require that the university to take down the names of any buildings that have been named after anyone who has enslaved another person. So that was a multi-year process with a lot of pain points that I can talk about offline. But we did that and are continuing to work to identify the names of those who were hired and enslaved, both by the leaders of the college and the college itself. It's been slow going because, as we know, the history of enslaved people has been erased in cruel ways, including by not putting last names down. We've had better historical luck and deep research done to uncover an enslaved burying ground that predates our campus. Our campus moved to this space in 1910. Remarkably, the main space of what we've identified as the burying ground is still intact and hasn't been built on, which is a miracle on our campus, to be honest. We've spent the last 3 years building relationships with descendants of those families who were enslaved over thousands of acres of land. We will never know who's buried in this sacred space, but those descendants have become are deep community partners, and they are helping to drive the design of what will be a permanent memorial that we'll be putting on our campus, that will have the family names with space for more names as we learn about other histories. And I would say those of us who grew up in community engagement are very grateful to be at the table, because of the community engaged and a community-centered approach has been there from the beginning, and how we think and work with the descendant communities and the kind of deep abiding relationships we're trying to build. And that's been crucial. We hope to have this memorial to be put up in the next year or so. And with that, we will be very, very, very boldly naming both the history of enslavement on the land, but also the institution's desecration of the burying ground in 1912 and again in 1947. And we will be clear that we were a part of that. And the memorial itself, I hope, will be one part of a reparative act for those grave mistakes that the institution made, but also part of healing and building new relationships. One of the things we're planning to do is to plant a new witness tree. There's a 210-year-old tree on the current site, but as part of the memorial is planting a new witness tree to witness the new healing that we hope to bring forth with this memorial and these new relationships with the descendants that we have the honor to meet and learn from.
Yeah, I echo that. Thank you, John, for that question, because I think that's a great question that really highlights and brings out the functional integration, right, of diversity, equity, inclusion, and community engagement work, to Amy's point of how do we partner and work with those descendants and the community around those histories and those stories is a great example of some of the functions, not just the structure, but the impact of the benefit of having a structure there in place that can help support some of those efforts in that work. So thank you for that, John. We have another one, Paul, great question as well. We all know about funding and resources in higher education. That's always a thing. So Paul's question is more so about the strategies, philanthropic, grant writing, university leadership directed. So what are some ways that you are building capacity in terms of staffing and some of those other tangible resources to do some of the work that we all know is needed on our campuses?
I don't want to monopolize time, so I'll wait until my other colleagues can have a chance to say something.
I'm happy to offer. Paul, thank you for that question. I think my answer to your question is yes, all of it. Absolutely, you know, we were lucky to start with some university resources. However, so much of that is set by the state through student fees and funding. And so we have to sort of grapple with the vicissitudes of how these funds are made available to us. So absolutely, we work with large-scale grants, DOE grants for a lot of our student success programs, our gateway programming, our, like many of our campuses, we have McNair Fellows. We have some funding from those large grants. I may have mentioned that we have a grantsmanship library in our shop, and so we are available to the campus community and the community. So we have resources through Candid, and formerly the Foundation Network. We are the Central Texas branch of Candid. And so we have some resources for our nonprofits for small funding, but most importantly, family foundations in Central Texas. So we have some vision into what's available for, our home turf. I would say, though, that based on thinking about capacity, we are very, very innovative, and we lean heavily. There is one advantage to being part of a highly decentralized, gigantic behemoth campus, which is that nothing will get done unless you are willing to collaborate across units and divisions. And so a lot of the work that we are able to put forward, we're able to do through partnership. So a great example, my colleagues talked about faculty fellows. for instance. We've been so incredibly lucky to be able to work with faculty fellows who we've helped to in past years, we've helped along on the hiring process as well, right? Saying that, you know, these folks who are clearly wonderful in their jobs and will be great assets to each of your individual colleges, can we provide a small stipend for them to lead community engaged work? And out of a faculty fellows program, we have a nationally known project called Project Males out of the University of Texas at Austin, led by Dr. Victor Saenz and Luis Bonwan. So, you know, we are creative as it pertains to that. We in trying to create our pipeline of diverse students going into academia. We have supported graduate students across our institution. Graduate students of also of diverse backgrounds, essentially working in our shop. So getting work experience through us and also getting some funding through us. Our graduate students, I know this is true for all of our shops, for everybody on this call, our graduate students are our staff. They are as capable, as driven, as focused on mission as anybody else on any of these teams. And so we meet their enthusiasm and their energy and provide them a stable home environment in our departments as well. Those are a few examples. I think, you know, working with the creation of, although our division began in 2007, creation of these deans of diversity offices are pretty recent, but that's another source of collaboration. And recently we've been moving toward more collaborative funding for projects proposed as well. So I think the name of the game at UT is partner with people and, you know, aim for interest convergence and know that the sum of the parts is incredibly great.
In addition to appreciate the comments around collaboration, that has been one of our key focus areas inside of our institution among our 10 colleges. But I wouldn't underestimate the value of collaborations with other like-minded organizations in our community. We have a number of very robust nonprofits focused around civil dialogue, civic engagement, leadership development. And so some of those collaborations have been very powerful, aiding our capacity, our ability to engage students across the system. And so I think when we think about collaborations, looking at what is available in our external space as well as our internal space is really critical. And then just rethinking staffing models. For community colleges, this is a particular issue given budgetary challenges across the country. Maricopa receives no operational funds from our state. It's a very small STEM allocation. We were written out of the state budget years ago in terms of operational funds. So I think just rethinking what a staffing model could look like, and it doesn't necessarily have to always mean full-time staff. Those days I think are behind us. And so how do we adequately leverage either fellows or community-based partnerships to increase our bandwidth and capacity? Those will be some very key discussions moving forward.
I do want to echo, I know that Amy mentioned as well, but also Ari put it in the chat. The Bonner Foundation has been helpful for us to do that exact thing that Anna has mentioned in terms of working and helping students kind of make some of those relationships and build relationships. So having a 4-year model of students that are working with partners in the community really helps us a lot, in addition to faculty fellows and some of the other things that Suchi mentioned as well. So yes, the name of the game is mixing and matching lots of things and collaborating wherever we're finding some of those synergies. Absolutely. So I know we're getting close to time, but I did want to see if any of our panelists wanted to offer anything else that you've learned, any lessons you've learned, any takeaways, any experiences that you want to share with others who are kind of grappling with this integrated structure or integrated functions of diversity work and community engagement efforts.
I want to follow up on the staff thread a minute, and also thank you, Ari, for that great reminder and the great support the Bonner Foundation provides. We have leveraged the opportunity of co-locating these two centers inside a unit to think about staff development. And so when we think about cross-cutting functions like operations or communications, right, things that both the large Center for Civic Engagement, our small little backbone equity office need, we really tried to be strategic about professional development for people who are already doing the work and who might want to grow into more of the work or more advanced work, doing those cross-cutting features for both offices instead of one. And so just if there's talent you're trying to retain in this resource constraint environment that we're all in, I have found that has been a great opportunity for us to give people new challenges and chances to grow, and sometimes more money too. And so just putting that out there as something that's been a great opportunity for some folks on my team.
I just wanted to thank you again for having me. And I wanted to say two things. One, here anymore, as we continue on in our diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even social and civic engagement work, we have to find ways to incubate in various different pockets of the institution to stay relevant. Because, there will be individuals who will want to mute the voices of those who are doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work and saying that it's important. So being intentional around, being relevant in broader other different spaces at the institution is key. The second thing is that as we journey on in our work, it's important that we try to gain a fresher and better understanding of what community is. When we talk about community engagement, we should be bringing the same rigor and the same energy around recruitment and retention and climate and culture within the walls of the institution, the same rigor that we take outside of the institution a lot of times in social and civic engagement. So that's one thing that I'm working on with my team now, to see how those things overlap and how we reimagine what community is.
Thank you for that. That's a great way to wrap us up. I know it's always hard because I'm sure we could have kept going on and on and on about this. So I thank everyone for sharing. Great questions. These are awesome. Absolutely continuing the conversation. I'm going to drop my email. So if you have any things that come up, so as this kind of settles with you and you have additional questions, additional comments, additional things you want to share, please feel free to pass them my way. Again, the goal here is to collect lots of information in order to figure out what's the best way that Campus Compact can also share this back to the community for those who are thinking about it, trying to grapple with some of these things, trying to maximize some of the integrated structures and functions if you have that on your campus. So if there's anything that you feel will be valuable from a perspective that Campus Compact can offer, please feel free to share them with me. I'll compile those and look to share those out at the end of my fellowship wrapping up this summer. So again, thank you for all the panelists. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for all those who decide to spend some time to listen and to engage in space with us. And I look forward to hopefully talking to you more about the same topic. Have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.